It happened last fall when I was house-sitting for my uncle. He owns a large, older home on the outskirts of town, nestled deep into a heavily wooded area. He was away on a business trip for a week, and since I had just finished my classes for the semester, I agreed to stay there and watch the house. The first couple of nights were peaceful. The house had a slight creak to it, but that was expected with its age. The occasional sound of wind rustling through the trees outside was almost comforting. I spent most of my time lounging on the couch, watching TV or scrolling through my phone, appreciating the quiet break from the noise of campus life. On the third night, though, I started to feel uneasy. I was in the living room, half asleep on the couch, when I thought I heard something outside. It sounded like footsteps crunching over the fallen leaves in the yard. I muted the TV and listened closely. The sound came again, slow, deliberate steps, as if someone was pacing just beyond the tree line. I sat up, my heart already starting to race. The front of the house had large windows that faced the yard, but it was too dark to see anything outside. I convinced myself it was just an animal, a deer, or maybe a stray dog. But something about it didn't sit right with me. Just as I was about to unpause my show, I heard it. A knock. Not on the front door, but on the window. I turned my head so fast I nearly gave myself whiplash. There was nothing but darkness outside. My reflection in the glass stared back at me, wide-eyed and tense. I waited, frozen, barely breathing. Then it came again. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I scrambled for my phone, ready to call someone, anyone. But before I could dial, something even worse happened. A voice. "I see you." It was low and raspy, like someone had been screaming for hours and was barely able to talk. My stomach dropped. Every instinct in my body screamed for me to run, but I was paralyzed. My eyes darted toward the door. It was locked. Every door and window in the house was locked. I had checked earlier. But that didn't matter. Someone was outside, and they knew I was here. I finally found the courage to move. I shut off the TV, plunging the room into darkness. I grabbed my phone and, on shaking legs, crept toward the hallway leading to the back of the house. My uncle's bedroom had heavy blackout curtains. I could hide in there. I had barely made it past the staircase when something banged against the front door. It wasn't a knock this time. It was forceful, aggressive, like someone slamming their fist against the wood. I stopped in my tracks, my pulse thudding in my ears. Then another bang, and another. I turned and ran to my uncle's room, locking the door behind me. My fingers fumbled with my phone as I dialed 911. The dispatcher picked up and I whispered my address, explaining that someone was outside trying to get in. As I was talking, I heard something from the window. A scraping sound, slow and deliberate, like nails dragging across the glass. I couldn't stop myself. I turned my head toward the sound, even though I didn't want to. And there, just beyond the curtain, I saw it. A hand, a pale, skeletal hand pressed against the glass, fingers splayed out, almost like it was feeling for something. I lost it. I started hyperventilating, barely able to answer the dispatcher's questions. I just kept repeating, "Please hurry. Please, someone is outside." The scraping stopped, but before I could even feel a moment of relief, I heard footsteps, this time from inside the house. I was certain every door was locked. I had checked them. There was no way anyone could have gotten in. But the sound was clear, soft but deliberate footsteps moving through the hallway just outside the bedroom. Then the doorknob turned. I screamed, pressing myself against the far wall. The dispatcher was still on the line, telling me to stay calm, that officers were on the way. But all I could do was stare at the doorknob, watching as it twisted back and forth, testing the lock. Then, suddenly, silence. No more footsteps, no more scraping, nothing. I stayed in that room, barely breathing, until I saw the flashing red and blue lights through the cracks of the curtains. The police searched the entire house and surrounding property, but they found nothing. No footprints, no forced entry, no sign that anyone had been there. But I know what I heard. I know what I saw. I never stayed in that house alone again. And to this day, I still wonder, did they get in, or were they already inside the whole time? My name is Ethan, and if I'm being honest, I don't know what I'm doing with my life. I felt lost for a long time, drifting between jobs, cities, and people, hoping something would stick. It never did. Last summer, I ended up in a small town in Oregon, crashing at a distant cousin's cabin while trying to figure out my next move. The town was nothing special, quiet, surrounded by endless forest, and just remote enough to make you feel disconnected from the world. I told myself I'd only stay for a couple of weeks, just long enough to get my head straight. One night, I found myself at a local dive bar, the kind where the bartender knows everyone by name except for me. I sat in the corner, nursing a beer and trying to ignore the sideways glances from the locals who weren't used to strangers. I didn't belong there, and I knew it. I was about to leave when an older man took the stool next to me. He had a face carved by years of hard living and a voice like gravel. He asked me where I was from, what I was doing in town. I gave him the usual vague answers, and he just nodded knowingly. Then, without looking at me, he said something that sent a shiver up my spine. "You see the lights yet?" I didn't know what he meant, and before I could ask, he finished his drink, slapped some cash on the bar, and walked out. I watched him go, feeling an uneasy weight settle in my chest, something about his tone, like he was warning me. I left the bar not long after and started the long walk back to the cabin. The road was empty, lined on both sides by thick trees that swallowed the moonlight. It was the kind of dark that made you feel like you weren't supposed to be there. That's when I saw them. Distant lights flickering between the trees deep in the forest. At first, I thought they were headlights, maybe someone driving on a hidden road, but they moved strangely, too fast, too erratic. They weaved between the trees like they were floating, darting in and out of sight. Then I heard the voices. They were faint, but they were there. Muffled whispers, overlapping, like a chorus of people speaking just out of reach. I couldn't make out any words, but the tone was unmistakable, urgent, insistent, calling. A chill ran through me. Every instinct screamed at me to keep walking, to not acknowledge whatever this was. But my feet slowed. I found myself stepping toward the trees, drawn in by the lights, by the voices. They didn't feel human. I don't know how long I stood there watching. The lights grew brighter, the voices louder. My head started to ache, my vision blurring at the edges. It felt like something was pulling me forward, like my body wasn't my own anymore. Then, just as suddenly as they appeared, the lights went out. The voices stopped. The forest was silent. I stumbled back, my heart hammering against my ribs. My legs felt weak, like I'd been standing for hours. The road was empty, the trees dark and still. I turned and ran, not stopping until I reached the cabin. I locked the door behind me, my hands shaking. I barely slept that night. I kept expecting to hear something outside, see something through the window, but nothing came. The next morning, I went back to the bar, hoping to find the old man. He wasn't there. I asked the bartender about him, but he just gave me a strange look. There's no one like that around here. I left town the next day. I didn't say goodbye to my cousin, didn't tell anyone what happened. I just packed my bags and drove until the town was nothing but a memory in my rearview mirror. I still don't know what I saw that night. Maybe I don't want to know. But sometimes when I'm alone in the dark, I swear I still hear those whispers, calling me back. It was just another quiet night at the library. I worked the late shift at my university's campus library, a job I took mostly because it was easy and paid decently. My shift was simple: check books in and out, organize the shelves, and lock up at midnight. Most nights were uneventful. This one, however, was different. The library was huge, spanning 3 floors, with long, winding rows of bookshelves and private study rooms. It was the kind of place where even the smallest noise seemed to echo endlessly. By 11:30, the place was practically deserted. Only 1 or 2 students remained, finishing up their assignments. I did my usual closing routine, turning off unused lights, straightening up the front desk, making my final rounds. As I passed by the 3rd floor study rooms, I noticed something strange. The light in the last room was still on. That was odd. The study rooms were usually empty by now. I walked over and peered through the small window in the door. The room was empty, yet the light flickered slightly, as if someone had just been in there. I opened the door, switched the light off, and continued my rounds, chalking it up to someone forgetting to turn it off. Then, as I reached the main staircase, I heard it. A soft rustling sound, like the turning of a page. I froze, straining to listen. The library was silent, except for that one noise coming from somewhere deep within the rows of bookshelves. I swallowed, suddenly feeling uneasy. Maybe someone was still inside. Maybe they hadn't heard the closing announcements. I took a slow step forward, calling out, "Hello? The library is closing in a few minutes." No response. I turned the corner into one of the aisles, my heart pounding. The shelves loomed high above me, casting long shadows. The overhead lights buzzed faintly. There was no one there. And yet, I heard it again. Closer this time. The distinct sound of a book being pulled from a shelf. A chill ran down my spine. I turned sharply, expecting to see someone standing there, but the aisle was empty. The books were undisturbed. The silence felt heavier now, pressing down on me. I took a step back, my instincts screaming at me to leave. That's when I noticed something. One of the books, a large, leather-bound volume, was sticking out just slightly from the shelf. It hadn't been like that before. I reached out hesitantly and pulled it out. It was heavier than I expected, the cover worn and dusty. There was no title on the spine, no markings, just an old blank cover. As I flipped it open, the pages were wrong. They weren't printed like a normal book. They were filled with cramped, handwritten text, words scribbled in what looked like frantic desperation. The ink was smudged, some of it dripping down the pages like it had been written in a hurry. And then, at the bottom of one page, I saw it. A single sentence, written in large, jagged letters. "Do not turn around." My breath caught in my throat. I felt a presence behind me, a suffocating heavy weight in the air. My skin prickled. I wanted to run, to bolt for the exit, but I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. Then in the reflection of the glass bookshelf beside me, I saw it. A shadow. It wasn't mine. The figure stood just inches behind me, unmoving. No details, just a dark, humanoid shape, stretching unnaturally tall. My hands clenched around the book, my mind racing. My entire body screamed for me to flee, but I couldn't. The warning on the page repeated over and over in my head. "Do not turn around, do not turn around." I squeezed my eyes shut, my legs trembled. The air around me grew colder, like the presence was pulling the warmth from my body. And then, a whisper. Right against my ear, "You see me." A sharp gust of air rushed past me, like something had just moved. My body unfroze, and I finally did the only thing I could do. I ran. I sprinted through the aisles, nearly knocking over a cart of books, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I reached the front desk, slammed the book down, and yanked my bag over my shoulder. I didn't bother checking the rest of the library. I just bolted for the exit, throwing the doors open and stepping into the cool night air. The weight, the presence, the suffocating feeling, it was gone. I never worked a closing shift alone after that. I never spoke about it to anyone. But every now and then I think about that book, about the words inside, and about the thing that stood behind me, waiting for me to turn around.